Hi, welcome everyone. I'm thrilled to be here with this incredible panel. We've got so much to talk about this hour. It really is a golden age in science and biomedicine and discovery. We have precision diagnostics, targeted therapeutics, personalized medicine, on the science side, CRISPR, AI, you name it. But getting these scientific advances into actual therapies is hard. Takes years, millions, if not more, in investment. And so we really want to talk about how do we speed this up? What are the opportunities here to match the science with the marketplace and avoid that valley of death that we see so many therapeutics fall into and never emerge from? So we have an incredible panel. You can see their bios in the program. But I want to start with talking about some of the areas where these medical breakthroughs are coming from. And let's start with precision medicine and therapeutics that are really targeted to people's own genes. And I want to start with you, Neil. You just had a great heart drug debut last week. Congratulations. And are working on some really exciting discovery. So can you start us off and maybe tell us a little bit about the area and what you see, what's happening?
Yeah, maybe I'll start at the top and just say every industry really should aspire to precision. There was a beautiful polemic written maybe 2 years ago by Simon Winchester called The Perfectionist, and he goes through 9 or 10 different industries, and basically his argument is that every industry is only transformed once it is able to be precise. And precision comes from really 2 things. One is the ability to measure variables that are important and previously unmeasured, and the second is the ability to manipulate them. And so at Bridge, really our focus is the measurement, mostly of genetic information, but putting that in concert with phenotypic information so we can understand more about diseases and how they work. And the second is the ability to target those conditions at their source. And the rise of many of the modalities that you just spoke about has really helped us with that. So the medicine that you just talked about targets a well-described heart condition at its source with us using a small molecule. And we've been able to process a variety of different products through the pipeline in that way. So that's really how I think about precision and where our interests lie.
That's great. You let me unpack that a little bit. Last week, my colleague Elaine interviewed you, and you said the big challenge was to show can a bunch of nerds make a therapeutic, which I love. I love that quote. So can you talk a little bit about how you went from precision through a therapy and the process?
Yeah, so actually in this case, the precision arose from 2 different things. One was genome sequencing in and around the condition itself. And the second was the identification of a specific family in Portugal that should have had this condition but didn't. And we were able to identify the rescue mutation that was at work or attendant within the context of that family, and effectively our drug copies that. So the nerd comment was really, we could figure that out. We could basically discover the drug. We could kind of develop it, but no one thought we could commercialize it against Pfizer. And so that's kind of the challenge at play right now, and that's where we are.
Yeah, that's terrific. Jay, can you talk about some of the work you're doing at Amgen? And this is a big focus.
It is. I mean, this is really a golden age of therapeutic science. Never before had we had such an atomic resolution of disease. And then married to that, never before had we had such incredible therapeutic modalities to deploy against disease. At Amgen, we're very interested and focused on experiments of nature, how human genetics at population scale, especially in this moment of being able to prosecute large data sets with artificial intelligence and find patterns in complex constellation of data to distill down and understand what genetic events, heritable genetic events cause disease, what genetic events protect against disease, and then thinking about these 2 pathways at atomic resolution, we know just what to drug. Could we learn, as we have, that having elevations of a gene product called Lp(a) increases your risk for heart disease? Well, you can't eat better and Lp(a) goes down. It's not related to cigarette smoking. It doesn't get better with a statin or even with a PCSK9 inhibitor. But with a medicine created and invented to traffic into the liver, bind sugar receptors on the surface of a liver cell, penetrate the cell and shut down that gene, we can potentially protect patients from a second heart attack or maybe even a first heart attack. If precision medicine is finding the right medicine and getting it to the right patient at the right time, never before has there been a better moment to practice this brand of science. In the same thread, we asked a question in our Amgen Decode Genetics site in Reykjavik, which is the world-leading site for understanding human genetics at population scale. We said, obesity is such a public health crisis. What sort of patients are protected against it? Meaning it's all around them. It's in their family. It's in their community. But they don't develop it. And it turned out there's a handful of mutations in a protein called GIPR. And changes in this GIPR that lead to a reduced activity level protect against obesity. But only a few patients, only a few humans benefit from that. So we made a medicine that would then emulate that, which anybody could get. And now that medicine is in phase 3 clinical investigation. So we're always looking for new insights, often from experience of nature, to direct our experiments of therapeutic science. And they're all around us. Mutations in cancer cells that lead to unique sensitivities, proteins uniquely expressed on the surface of cancer cells, to which we can now, with bispecific antibodies or proteins with two hands, grab a natural and healthy immune cell and then trick it to go and become a serial killer of cancer cells by binding with another hand onto the surface of a cancer cell. And this is working for us just time and time again. It's not quite medications on demand, but we are in a golden age of therapeutic science, all benefiting from the deep and detailed understanding of human biology and human disease at population scale.
That's incredible. I mean, you mentioned obesity. I know you're an oncologist. I know you work in inflammation. Are there specific areas you think that are more tractable, more amenable to this personalized approach, or is it really like wide open, really any disease or state might be helped?
Well, I love your nerd comment, Neil, and I'm a doctor and chemist, and so I'm in your team there. No, there's no disease space that I can think of that doesn't stand to benefit from insights from human genetics. I mean, one of the most grand experiments of disease prevention is being conducted right now just against the background of human diversity that walks the earth. And so our ability to access collaboration with populations of, in some cases, patients, in other cases, healthy individuals, their genotypes as appropriate, and then correlate them to outcomes against rare or common diseases. Oh, we derive insights all the time about a new target or how best to study a new medicine to enrich for the greatest possible benefit to those based on their genetics.
Yeah, terrific. I know we want to dig in more to these genetic databases and their power, maybe a little bit later, but I also want to move over to AI because it's something so many people are excited about, and it's really entering this space so quickly. And I want to start with you, Grant. And can you discuss some of the maybe Zephyr AI or other areas and companies where you see the power of this technology? And as you describe it as laying it atop existing infrastructures. So I'd love you to kind of explain that to us.
Sure. Thank you. It actually makes it relatively easy because the two examples that were already given, those are the types of insights that we at Zephyr are uniquely positioned to deliver. So we raised a sizable round that was led by drug companies and health insurance companies to see if we could take population health data around roughly 86 million patients, and we focus on oncology and cardiometabolic. And our view on precision medicine is unequivocally a golden age of therapeutics, and the promise of precision medicine can finally be turned into practice. And so at Zephyr, we want to be partners with people like Amgen and say, we're doing these incredible innovations. How do we help target those innovations to the most consequential patients at the right place at the right time? And that cardiovascular disease is still the number one cost and cause of preventable death in the United States. And I think that epigenetic opportunities that are being laid bare by companies like Amgen we've always said there's a golden age, but the intersection between the knowledge that we have on the gene and the work that is done at the biological level, 20 years ago, the process of sequencing the gene, I don't think anybody thought that we'd be able to sequence the entirety of the gene for a couple $100 30 years later, and now the opportunity to merge that infrastructure, and that's why we use that term sitting on top. Now we want to just catalyze and ultimately be a partner to bring that innovation to market. And our view is precision medicine is as simple as letting patients and doctors get more time with each other. And anything we can do to automate the exorbitant volume of non-clinical tasks so that we can free up the capital and the data for drug discovery, we think is second to none. I'll give one metric. The average hospital in the United States today, like one single hospital, not a health system, produces roughly a petabyte of data a year, and yet less than 5% of that data is being used in patient and physician care. So imagine the revolution of a company like Amgen and a company like BridgeBio and being able to connect at Zephyr and say, hey, we've got a roadmap. We now know things about the gene and the human biology we've never known before. How do we then bring AI to be able to attack, whether it was thought to be impossible to document all of the protein folding in nature. That problem's been solved. Google solved that. It's incredible. So now what's the art of the possible? And we think the combination of the golden age of therapeutics plus the epigenetics that are being opened up, and in particular the opportunity to bring behavior in. I mean, cardiovascular disease could no longer be the most preventable expense in the United States because of the things that are being done on this panel. And I love nerds. I'm a nerd. And so we need more nerd things, more nerd infrastructure, more nerd empowerment. And I mean, I tell people all the time, what if in that 1 petabyte of data, there was a cure for you or your family?
Right. Oh, no, that's terrific. Okay, so a lot of points for Team Nerd today. Either of you can answer this, or anyone else really, but what is actually the power of AI where we are right now? Is it screening? Is it just like screening through those data, looking for patterns, finding genetic variants that might be interesting that like no person could really do?
Yeah, I'm happy to reflect on this. I mean, the truth is that at this moment, across the entire value chain of target identification, which target are we going to go after? What hill are we going to ask our drug hunters to take? All the way through to the post-market proof that a medicine approved for use is reading through to drug effectiveness, like an unambiguous clinical and economic benefit for society. At each of these steps now, artificial intelligence is well placed. It isn't that we have, like in the Highlander, like one AI to rule them all. It's rather that each of the slow steps of drug discovery, drug development, and medicine's commercialization are now raised to the power of AI. I'll give you a handful of examples. At Amgen, we're arguably the world's leader in protein engineering and complex protein therapeutics, biotech, as they say. And it was learned a couple of years ago by two scientists, actually from the computer science industry, working to make better video games and that can beat you at chess and whatnot, that we can actually predict protein structure now just by inputting the sequence of a protein. We could watch it fold in a computer. We could never do that before. It was always a month or a year or 3 years of experimentation to generate a single structure. Now imagine you're optimizing a prototype. We are fundamentally molecular sculptors in drug discovery. And now being able to do this in a computer, design, witness, change, witness, test, witness. By the time we make our first protein prototype, the computer systems with AI have already optimized the molecule for potency, selectivity, developability, solubility, things that matter when you're making a real medicine. That's drug discovery raised to the power of AI. In drug development, some of our clinical studies enroll 15, 20,000 patients worldwide. And that's a very difficult challenge, and it's a competitive space, which is good for patients, but it keeps R&D heads up at night. But now with artificial intelligence, we have a system at Amgen called Atomic, and it can leverage insights from medical practice to tell us what next site is most likely to have the next patient to enroll on our study. And this allows us to dramatically expedite the time, the pregnant pause between believing you have a medicine that can help people and then proving that it can help people in a phase 3 clinical trial. We aspire to take 2 years off the drug development timeline, all with artificial intelligence.
Wow.
I think just to pick up a couple things quickly, the power of that is at $2 or $3 million a day, moving something 2 years or 3 years isn't just economic. It's the opportunity to bring cures to patients in ways that have never, I mean, the idea of a cancer vaccine is now truly possible with AI for a variety of reasons. And then I think the other one that's, I think brings home this sort of Zephyr Amgen opportunities that you were articulating is now when you look at that sort of population health level, how do you take those therapeutic insights and merge the drug development and the drug discovery and be able to say, I might already have incredible drugs that could do amazing things. So this population can benefit from that change. And a great example is there's an enormous amount that can be done with prostate and non-small cell lung cancer. And that was never, previously we said prostate is over here, lung cancer is over here. And then looking at the underlying biology, we found at Zephyr, there's actually a more common between those molecules and those therapies and those opportunities for a drug that already exists. And that was just a label expansion use case that changed a number of people's lives. And then the last piece I would give in terms of the linkage of that discovery and development is, imagine if you could really get after clinical trial and recruitment with AI. And so the 20,000 patients is amazing, but what if before we got to 20,000 patients, we ran 100 billion agentic versions so that the 20,000 were the most biologically interesting interrogations we could do? And how does that truncate the go-to-market so that we put more money behind what matters most, again, for those patients whose biology, genetic or epigenetic, that we know? And I think that really is how the promise of precision medicine turns to practice. And then you can do amazing things like, hey, wouldn't you like to be enrolled in a study that if you, like my father has heart disease. The P(a) is very relevant to me. I would love to know, are there things that my genome and my epigenetics could do to help inform drug trials that I might be a patient for in 20 years? And I think that ultimately allows us with AI to get at one of the hardest problems in healthcare, which is accountability and access. We've tried consumer-directed health plans. We tried, co-insurance, deductible, this, that. At the end of the day, if you said, would you like your genome and your infrastructure to be used in drug discovery for drugs that might benefit you or your family down the road? I think that would be revolutionary, and the art of the possible with AI to match the right patient to the right therapeutic to the right biotech infrastructure is game-changing, and the liquidity that comes from that. I mean, unless you were in Boston or Biotech Beach, you didn't get the talent to do the exquisite protein sculpting that Amgen does. But now with AI, you can take the entirety of Biotech Beach or entirety of Boston, collapse it into an agent and say, great, you and your 5 friends now have the therapeutic power that Amgen had 10, 20 years ago. What can you do with that opportunity? And the democratization of that value, I think, is going to be exorbitantly exciting.
Okay, and I want to remind people we want to make this interactive, so feel free to use that code to put in questions that we'll start taking a little bit later. I want to turn to Doug and Alice. You were mentioning unmet needs and a lot of problems in the healthcare sphere. Let me start with you, Doug. I think mental health is one of our nation's largest unmet needs in terms of, lack of diagnosis, lack of treatments, especially pharmaceutical, and you've got some really exciting things in development. But can you talk? You've mentioned a whole paradigm shift might be needed. Can you talk about in this area how do we move things forward?
Yeah, sometimes the paradigm shift doesn't come from AI or technology or science. Sometimes the paradigm shift is the way we think about things, right? Looking at things in a different way. And I'll give you an example. At Cybin, we're developing novel therapeutics for mental health. Our lead asset is in phase 3 for depression, patients with depression. And the phase 2 results were spectacular. 2 doses, and after the second dose, 75% of those patients were in remission from their depression. It's remarkable. Not 2 doses a week or 2 doses a month, but just 2 doses. And so if I would, clearly that's a paradigm shift and a huge step from the standard of care today. sounds great. But then if I tell you that the compound is a modified psychedelic compound, where patients have quite a profound and powerful experience, immediately I know some of you will be skeptical about the data. And we get that quite a lot. It's frustrating, but it's also somewhat understandable in that we've been, since the early 1970s and the formation of the DEA and the war on drugs, telling our population that these compounds are scary or they're bad or they're dangerous. And now the science is telling us otherwise. There are multiple studies demonstrating very clear efficacy in mood disorders with these compounds. But it's just going to take a shift in mindset, I think, to help with adoption and reimbursement and many other things. During COVID, we saw, I think, a very positive shift in mindset around mental health, in that there's more of an openness, more of a willingness to accept and recognize these mental health challenges. But we need a further shift as well beyond that, and to look at and try and accept different ways of thinking and different ways of treating these conditions.
Do you think efficacy overcomes those reservations? Like if that drug just works so well in phase 3, are people going to get convinced?
Absolutely it does. That's one of the criticisms, of course, is, it was a small study, blah, blah, blah. But when you have effect sizes that are greater than 2, that's pretty convincing. So, we're very excited about the prospects in phase 3.
Great. So I want to move to I think the heart of this panel is really how do we move these from the science to the marketplace? There's so many challenges and hurdles, and I'd love you, Alice, to take the lead on this. Tell us about Bright Edge, and it's part of the American Cancer Society, and I think, I really had no idea they were doing something so sort of forward-thinking, and so I'd love to, if you could tell us a little bit about Bright Edge, because not everyone may know what it is, and then we can get into some of your ideas that you're working on.
Sure, happy to. So many folks will know American Cancer Society, which is the leading cancer fighting organization here in the U.S. We operate through 3 pillars. So we're the largest non-governmental funder of cancer research. That's over $5 billion granted to date, 53 Nobel laureates, 25,000 researchers, 1,500 institutions. So a pretty significant network, if you will. What's not known is that many people go on to touch every major cancer breakthrough. And so ACS actually touched over 60% of all of the venture-backed Series A to C deals between 2019 and 2022, between our grantees and our research professors. So there's a lot of capital market activity around ACS that we had not, as a public charity, participated in. The second thing is that we provide direct patient support. Our mission is to end cancer as we know it for everyone. So health equity and health disparities is a primary focus. And so we run the national hotline. We are in over 20,000 communities providing free lodging and rides. And we also issue the public health guidelines around detection and screening. And then lastly, we're the country's largest advocacy organization, 50 state capitals, all of the major cancer legislation that you know of, along with key federal policy initiatives were really penned by American Cancer Society. Bright Edge is the newest kid on the block. And basically, American Cancer Society, thankfully, woke up and said, we can't sustain this model. We're here on the front end, and we are vibrant in promoting great talent and discovery, but then we're also on the back end, and we're providing all of the safety net services for patients, and yet we don't do anything in the middle, which is really inform and educate and participate in product development. And so today, Bright Edge is both the venture allocation of the ACS investment pool, combined with restricted donor dollars to essentially invest in innovation for impact. So we are hacking the system by backing the best technology to really deliver on the broader systemic issues around health disparity and equitable access and equitable outcomes. So we invest across the entirety of the cancer care continuum. While we're very passionate about therapeutics, honestly, if we only invest in therapeutics and we don't get behind detection technologies, we're contradicting ourselves because we spend a lot of effort promoting prevention and detection. Meanwhile, if we become more successful in cancer outcomes, we will have more survivors. And so what are their needs? And so today we're about 50% therapeutics, 25% diagnostic device, and 25% tech. And really, we're in a unique position to be able to blend capital, both financial and, I often say that BrightEdge has the mineral rights to American Cancer Society. So imagine unlocking all of that knowledge capital through the networks, but also the insights into the downstream barriers that stand in the way of these products eventually delivering the promise that all of the developers here are investing in. And that really comes down to informing those key product development decisions at times when they can be taken, and not waiting until we go bump in the market and have to advocate for a CMS policy rule, or we have a shame and blame game. So we're really optimistic that financial innovation can actually deliver population and system level durable outcome and deliver a sustainability and mission at scale.
So you're funding science and development and pushing the science that way, but also earning money back to the ACS.
Correct.
Which is really cool. Can you, I know you've had some spin-offs. Can you talk about a success story?
Yeah, so we have definitely different buckets. I think that when you look at American Cancer Society and our knowledge of what really are the problems, the persistent problems in the cancer space, we published the Book of Truth. So with the CDC and NIH, we have the nation's state of cancer along with cancer facts and figures. So we know which cancer types continue to not have advancements despite us celebrating innovation in cancer. So brain, pancreatic, esophageal. We know that Black and brown communities, rural communities, certain cancer types, pediatric, these are areas where the market is actually quite good at widening disparities. And so, when we think of success for us, it's really triple bottom line, right? We are backing great science. We may be pulling through mission that we had granted early on at the discovery level, and we're really addressing those big populations problems. So an example of a recent exit for us was a brain cancer company started by 2 Yale ACS grantees that was in glioblastoma. That's a cancer type that really nobody wanted to touch with the 10-foot pole. And that company was, Modify Bio was acquired by Merck last autumn for $1.3 billion. So just giving the market more confidence that even in unmet, hard-to-treat cancer types, there is viability. And then meanwhile, we also have some interesting investments in areas of mission delivery. So financial barriers to care, 80% of cancer patients dip into their lifetime savings, 40% actually go bankrupt. And people are struggling to find how to fill those gaps. And many of the companies here, and my background was also in biopharma, do what they can to fill that gap. But it's navigating to those assistance programs that can be so manual. You're going to every single website. One of our companies, TaylorMed, has a financial navigation software platform at point of care that can match patients based on eligibility and even enroll them to over 17,000 programs. What's beautiful about this is that it's in an area that we know well. It touches more lives than perhaps our own direct patient support services can, but there is a clear ROI for the hospitals to do the right thing. So they can increase caseload, they can reduce bad medical debt, and patients can adhere to care without worrying about a surprise bill. And the beauty here is that American Cancer Society actually granted to the hospitals to cover the salaries of the navigators. So we now don't have to grant. So imagine if cancer is a microcosm of healthcare overall, what does sustainability look like in this space? I think we're a mature enough sector now that we need to be thinking of how can we deliver great technological innovation, but also not avoid and skirt around these bigger problems, but address them head on. And so those would be examples of what we would consider success stories.
Beautiful,
Can
beautiful.
I ask a question? Since you said it was like interactive,
Yes,
maybe
go ahead.
Can I try a?
Yeah.
So we've been thinking a lot about this for a variety of reasons. You said made a great comment. As we think of the golden age, but we also think of access and adoption, and ultimately, how do you see the role of a tumor registrar and the care navigator? I should say, we believe that they are one of the most foundational and overworked, underappreciated parts of the American healthcare system, and it feels like the opportunity to empower them with agentic AI could really create a revolution that would allow us to really get access. And if we don't diagnose, doesn't treatment is less relevant.
No, absolutely. I think that what we're seeing across the board, again, when we think of the discovery-led innovation landscape being so vibrant, and we talk about Valley of Death, on the public health intervention side, we would argue there's an impact impasse, right? Like, we know there's a lot of impact potential, but there's all sorts of other reasons, whether they be the technology, the business model, the market, that really make it difficult to form companies and to commercialize those products, yet that could actually be more impactful than a new therapeutic in that space. And so where American Cancer Society needs to show up, as an investor, we obviously want to diversify the syndicate, but we can bring the evidence and almost develop a discovery engine in the type of patient and population insights that we have to either inform novel therapeutic development or do what you're suggesting, which is encourage more tech-enabled solutions. So we just launched our third accelerator specifically focused on digital health in social determinants of health.
Oh, awesome.
So financial security, food stability, and social isolation. Evidence exists that these are drivers of cancer mortality. We don't see a lot of companies to invest in. Why is that? And they definitely don't need mouse models, and they don't need mentorship and IP. They need customer proximity with health systems to co-develop these solutions, and they need specificity around what's really the friction in cancer patient journey. So those would be examples where we're being almost like a lean startup in how ACS is thinking of how do we deploy those dollars, but how do we also marry them with the strategic capital to really make outsized performance.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I'd love, any and all of you to take this on, which is, what are the challenges? Like, what are the roadblocks? What's keeping us in this golden age from what Mike Milken himself calls faster cures? Like, where are they? How do we get this uptake technology sped up? Neil?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Maybe I'll start at the earliest stage of the process, which is discovery. People don't often spend real time there because the dollars are small, but they tend to be the riskiest and furthest away from cash flow. And we've employed any number of different strategies to try to limit expense there. We do so because we're trying to solve smaller patient population problems. It could be appropriate to spend $100 million to take a drug into the clinic for large pharma, but for the marketplaces that we serve, we like to do it under 10 million. So how do we do it? First thing is we just map out all the rate-limiting steps. You'd be surprised the number of steps taken that are dependent on someone taking 4 days to turn around a material service agreement or 3 days to review a CDA, or really every rate-limiting step should be something biological, like the cell doubling time, or something physical, like I got to ship chemistry from China back to the United States. It shouldn't be anything other than that. And when you really focus on that, plus only doing the critical experiments that actually have some positive predictive validity in the clinic, we tend to want to answer more questions than we need to, especially early on, to give ourselves some comfort that something is going to succeed. But in the end of the day, most things do fail, even in this era of precision medicine. And so trying to limit the number of activities and map out those rate-limiting steps is where we really focus. There are other things we do. Obviously, there's regulatory innovation for some of the conditions we work on, really focus on, does it really make sense to do a non-human primate study or something like that when a child is going to otherwise pass away during that course of time? We look at employing technologies that have been referred to here in terms of running in silico experiments that could speed things up. But really, it's sort of pretty simple writing down of each step and trying to just get a little bit more time savings for each one of them. And I think that's what's enabled us. 18 INDs, we have an average of about $6 million spent in a little under 3 years. So been able to do that pretty efficiently just through old-fashioned engineering work.
I'll jump in. I think you've covered a lot in drug development, but in drug discovery, there are generational gaps sometimes between really understanding a disease, characterizing it clinically, fully understanding its futility. Think of Alzheimer's disease, think of pancreatic cancer, and then having an effective medicine. And when you break that down, these aren't the slow steps that get a little faster with AI. These are the major leaps. These are the paradigm shifts that we experience sometimes in some fields, but happen all too infrequently. The first one is just understanding the root cause of the disease. It's so fundamental. It's the fundamental biology, the fundamental science. It's often informed by genetics. What causes lupus? We have no idea. What triggers multiple sclerosis? We have no idea. And so by and large, our medicines for these serious conditions are Band-Aids that address the symptoms or the pathologies, the pathways that have gone awry, but don't get to the root cause of the disease. So disease understanding, and this is why public sector funding for fundamental research is so vital and is fundamentally a public good. Second are the therapeutic technologies that allow you to drug the undruggable. There are a handful of targets where we know about them. We've known about them for 20 years, 30 years, in some cases 40 years, and there's no drug. KRAS, the gene product that killed my father with pancreatic cancer, was cloned out in the early 1980s. It's known for years that this is the driver of pancreatic cancer, colorectal cancer, a significant amount of lung cancer, and it had never been drugged. And it wasn't for lack of trying. Almost every pharmaceutical company, innumerable biotechs, couldn't find a path to drug this until Angela Coxon and some chemists at Amgen found a trick to grab onto an amino acid at the active site called cysteine. I won't bore you with the chemistry. I would love to. But we're able to latch on to that one amino acid and surrender KRAS and make the first KRAS drug. This is a paradigm shift in therapeutic science. And then the third of three challenges I'll share is maybe we're thinking about it the wrong way, Doug. I was really moved by your description that sometimes it's the naivete of an early career scientist or people that can step back from their own work for a while and realize what's really missing. As a cancer doctor, we've become a lot better at managing cancer. I'm a stem cell transplant doctor, so I treat patients who have leukemias or lymphomas with just a medieval practice of high-dose chemotherapy, radiation, and stem cells transplantation. And this profession should go away if we could really treat cancer. But how would we prevent cancer? Very few people work on preventing cancer. And the medicines that often make it to cancer prevention are medicines that worked in stage 3, 4, late-stage disease. And then they were just safe enough to march up to upfront disease. And then someone says, well, tamoxifen, it worked pretty well in stage 1 breast cancer. Maybe we should try it as a preventive agent. This is by and large where cancer prevention insights arise from. We need to completely turn this around. We ran an experiment at our Iceland site that I told you about moments ago, and we asked the question, who's not getting breast cancer that mathematically should be getting breast cancer? We just published this research. It's out in the open domain right now. Anybody could follow up on this. I hope that we do too, and I expect we will. And it was learned that patients, subjects, actually none of them as yet have breast cancer, who have a reduction in the activity of a gene called GAD34 have a 53% less likely chance of developing breast cancer. And so time can't move fast enough now to understand that biology, try a GAD34-directed medicine, and see if it could prevent cancer. Because the genes that we might be inspired by to prevent the disease are likely very different than those that are causing the disease. They lead to genomic instability, the mutational burdens that drive cancer. And so I love this idea that you shared, that we have to see this from another angle, armed with these powerful tools that we have. So for the slow steps, I'm in for fundamental biology, new therapeutic modalities, and to be as serious and creative around disease prevention and health as we are with disease intervention today.
Yeah. I love this panel because every answer leads me to like 8 different questions I could ask to follow up. But I do want to take a minute to acknowledge that applause we just heard in the room about public funding of science. And I have to tell you, almost every single question I'm getting through attendees here online are about these federal cuts to science. And Doug, maybe I'll let you start, and anyone else can weigh in because we were talking about this in the ready room. But how worried are you? We're talking about this innovation pipeline, and that's what we capitalize on. How concerned are you about cuts to science, cuts to scientific training? Like, where are these, 10 years out, where are the breakthroughs going to come from?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think some of these cuts that are happening today, we won't see the impacts of for many years. Some of the basic research, some of the gaps between research that's commercially viable, that get filled with public funding, we won't see the impacts of those for quite some time. But if there's a knock-on effect to reduced training, reduced healthcare providers, that's obviously very, very worrying. For me, the thing that keeps me awake at night is patient access, actually. And so In depression, there are 21 million people in the U.S. suffering from depression. 40 million people taking SSRIs or SNRIs every day. And yet we have already a shortage of psychiatrists and therapists. I think only about 18% of psychiatrists are open to seeing new patients. The wait time for a new visit is 40 to 70 days for a depressed patient. Depressed patients often spend a decade before they're diagnosed. There's a real lack of resources, and we're bringing these new therapeutics to market, but they're a little different. I mentioned that it's just 2 doses we expect to give patients for quite long benefits. But those 2 doses need to be given in a clinical setting under supervision, and they take 4 to 6 hours. So this is infrastructure, real estate, space that is needed. Already these patients, these mental health patients, are quite high-touch patients. They see their physician 6 to 9 times a year. So if we're able to take patients out of the system by offering remission, that's a big impact. But we're trying to think beyond the therapeutic as well. We recognize that the infrastructure needs to grow and expand. So we're looking at ways that we can partner to help drive that or encourage it. That might be partnering with real estate investors, with project funding lenders. It might be leveraging current infrastructure that's underutilized, specialty pharmacies where minor procedures are performed, infusion centers where rooms are sitting empty, they're not 100% utilized. And so those are some things we're thinking. Outside the U.S., in single-payer markets, it's more of a public-private partnerships that we're thinking. In China, we're working, trying to partner with the government there, because until you get their mind in the right place, nothing else is going to happen.
Yeah.
So we're trying to be creative and think beyond the therapeutic to maximize patient access.
Right. And anyone else, like if we do get less federal support of basic science, can companies step in to fill that? Venture capital? How do we fill this void?
I think they have to. I mean, I think the reason for a variety of reasons, and I'm sure I'll get in trouble for doing this, but why there was collapse is because investment in basic research is one of the most impactful dollars. Every dollar of NIH funding that goes to cancer research roughly has a $2.56 of value of ROI, and there are not in healthcare that long, but there are very, very, very few things that have a very clear, if I invest $1, I get 2 back. And I do think that one of the huge opportunities that the administration is creating is if there is a recession of the role in terms of the federal NIH, HHS, if there's a receding of their dollars, human capital, otherwise, I think that the requirement is to create public-private partnerships, because this is too consequential, too important. We are the research in America. We are the gold standard. We are the best drug discoverers in the world for countless reasons. If that goes elsewhere, which it likely will, we have a competition with China in economic, culture, military. We call them near peers. If we take a step back, somebody else will step into that. When we're sitting here talking about a golden age of therapeutics, creating exorbitant amounts of value, if the funding is going to be pulled back, I think the opportunity for unique partnerships across for-profits, nonprofits, will have to step into that to ensure that that golden age doesn't come to a screeching halt. And we've got to make sure the policy, the infrastructure, the innovation, all can align right now. And there's a uniquely sort of catalytic moment that if we can take advantage of this and the conditions that are being set both on and off the hill, I think it will continue to be the golden age of therapeutics. But if not, it could be an enormous self-inflicted wound.
Mm-hmm. Let's use some numbers to put this into perspective. So the NIH budget each year, roughly $48 billion year on year. That just can't go away. Private research and development in the biopharmaceutical industry jumped from about $163 billion to about $190 billion. the difference between the $190 billion, which is really for product development, to take all that's known about science and distill out therapeutic potential, is very different than the 48 that is a force multiplier of knowledge, tools, techniques, data. It is open, it is accessible. It is the very foundation that all of our medicines are built from. I was a scholar for 10 years at Harvard as a professor. You can't prescribe a paper. We weren't making medicines. We were contributing to and creating an awareness or a knowledge or tools to create that knowledge, hoping, like messages in a bottle, that these manuscripts would serve to inspire scientists and private industry to distill out the therapeutic potential and make a medicine, something that's very hard to do in the academic setting. This partnership, this implicit relationship, this ecosystem has worked seamlessly and is honed and optimized for many, many years. There are inefficiencies that should be addressed for sure in government resourcing of research. Every scientist admits this. But en masse, at this moment of unprecedented opportunity, we can't take our foot off the gas pedal. We'll lose our competitive edge. It's very exciting what's happening in China, flipped another way. And as a global company, there's a lot of innovation there that used to be contract research or fast follower research and now is ever more innovative. And so as an American working for an American company, I hope that we sustain our leadership in this position. But that public resource for science is a force multiplier in a way that research and development funding in private industry really can't be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe just to pick up on that, what's the opportunity now? There was a famous paper written, 10 years ago by Neller suggesting that sources of actual drugs coming out of NIH-funded laboratories are not all that predictable. Some of them come from Harvard, some of them come from MIT, a lot of them come from universities that may not be picking up as much NIH funding, and the concentration of funding in and around ideas and institutions has grown over time. Just as you see in venture capital, the concentration of capital around certain hypotheses being ever more prevalent than having a diversified view. So I think independent, like what they call fire rankings or whatever, the use of effectively spreading dollars across a wide variety of new hypotheses, that's an opportunity now, and I've heard the administration talk about that. So perhaps there are elements of opportunity here in the rethinking, but I agree with Jay that we need the magnitude of capital to remain the same. Opportunities from it will be profound.
And there are things that since Jay mentioned Harvard, there's examples of unique public, private, and commercial engagement where it does work and the ships are being lifted in all cases, and the Broad is a fabulous example of that. So how do we go create a Broad 2.0 in the age of sort of agentic AI and golden age of drug discovery? And I think, Amgen, a wonderful academic center, partners, and NIH, right? The key is you can't expect a venture fund or a private equity or private industry to step in and do NIH's role. The key is it's got to be and then of course, to Jay's point, there are abuses of the system and things that should be taken out, and the incentives of, I got to prove my research to get my next piece. And at the end of the rainbow, roughly 80% of dollars go to less than 10% of the gene. What if we opened that up and said, let's discover and see maybe the cure for cancer is over there, and the rising tide will lift all of those ships. But we've also got to be aware of, measure what matters. And part of the issue in all of this infrastructure is we haven't done a good job of articulating value. And there's a real opportunity right now to articulate value and articulate the role of commercial, the role of public, the role of private, and come together and say, hey, there are places that it works, like Broad. Let's see what a Broad 2.0 would look like and take advantage of that golden age and ensure that golden age continues to lead to incredible outcomes.
Yeah. We have a lot of great questions coming in rapid fire, so I want to turn to those. But before I do that, we're talking about global landscape. So I'd love maybe Jay and Neil to talk about the power of these biobanks globally, this turn to looking at more diverse, genetic databases. And if maybe one of you can, one of the questions that come in, like, as you're doing that, how do you ensure data sovereignty or make sure you're giving back to those populations from which you're, learning about variants?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think about it sort of in two ways. One is the proliferation of databases. So we were just at dinner last night talking about the wonderful efforts, 100,000 genomes being done in Saudi, a Pakistan database that led us to some interesting insights where we started a new drug discovery program in and around. There's probably 30 databases. Jay would be more up to date on all of them across the world. But that diversity, that variance effectively, anytime you're trying to pick up signal, you need more information to capture the variant signal that then shows you there's a new mutation for South Asians in dyslipidemia or et cetera, et cetera. So there's profound opportunity there. The genetic diversity, for instance, in Africa is profound, and we're starting to get more and more information from that. So that's one level. And then the second level is what I was referring to earlier, which is a single family somewhere on the globe that should have disease X and doesn't, can be an absolute gold mine. There was a single family in Portugal that we sequenced that led to the development of Attruby, the drug we were talking about earlier. There's a single family in Japan that we're studying right now that should have Duchenne muscular dystrophy that doesn't. And we've identified the rescue mutation there and are now looking at the therapeutic implications of that. So it could be down to a family, or it could be as broad as these broader databases. And I think you're right to say the responsibility then is for us to partner with those governments to make sure drugs are accessible in those nation states. And so that can either happen through free provision of drugs, as we are doing in the Caribbean, for instance, as a consequence of our studies of certain mutations in the Afro-Caribbean setting, or it can be done through some sort of paid regulatory processes. I think will be more and more common in the Middle East, but lots of opportunities there. I don't know, Jay.
I mean, I can't say it better. I can only say it differently. If you know a little bit about pizza, there's 3 ingredients. There's cheese, sauce, and dough. Yet it tastes different in Italy. It just tastes better, you know? And that's the same thing with human genetics at population global scale. There are genetic solutions in one country that are just different than the genetic solutions in another. We've learned so much just by comparing the Icelandic heritage of genetic mutations and comparing it to the UK Biobank on a short Spirit Airlines flight away. And then we add in the All of Us study from the United States or the South Korean database. We can then take some hypotheses learned over here and then test them, say with FinGen, with the Finnish database. This is very powerful because we can quickly establish in a computer whether a finding is real or truthful. Sometimes it's unique and it only exists in one genetic background, but sometimes it's replicated with different frequency in South Korea, and then overnight a drug discovery program is launched because we have validated the finding in a second orthogonal data set. It's so powerful. This is what makes us excited to get to work with the UAE or Qatar or with Indonesia, if they could be interested, to basically try to leverage countries that are building a very modern healthcare system with electronic medical records and fair data, interoperable data, appended with genetic information. Now with AI, finding patterns in this constellation of data is quite straightforward. So straightforward that we put a Freya supercomputer from NVIDIA over an Icelandic site just to try to open the aperture of pattern recognition between genetics and backgrounds. So it's a great source of information, but it's actually also really important if you're commercializing medicines, if you're bringing access to innovation to patients all around the world. We want to know that the solution inspired by a genotype here will work in patients, you know, in the middle, in sub-Saharan Africa, where, by the way, human diversity at the genetic level is greatest, but as yet the infrastructure to capture and correlate to clinical outcomes is not yet there, and time can't move fast enough for this.
And Neil, you mentioned sort of government agreements. Is that field, like the questioner asked about data sovereignty, is that evolving? Is that something you just deal with different governments?
It's fairly well templated. You mentioned the CNCD database from Pakistan, and this is a remarkable database because it was so carefully constructed and culturally sensitively constructed that, unique among many of the genetic information that scientists have access to, you can make an observation and then through an appropriate consent process go back to families who, say, lack a gene completely in their lineage and ask questions like, what are the blood counts? What are the liver functions? And actually collaborate and learn from the subjects in these databases. In Iceland, we enjoy the same privilege of being, through appropriate channels, to go back and work with individuals who are inspiring us with their genetic backgrounds. This will be different country to country, but there are now, I think, templates and data integrity processes that maintain anonymity and confidentiality.
All right, I'll let anyone take this. We focus a lot on genomics, but what about the other omics? Most diseases are not that straightforward.
I can just jump in quickly, I guess. We have a very sizable multi-omic product that we acquired, a couple 100,000 patients, and we think that there's going to be a revolution, much like what Jay just said, to match, create digital or composite biomarkers that match genomics, and then we were, the discussions on social determinants of health, transcriptome. I fundamentally, personally believe there's going to be a revolution on the large molecule side, what can be done on RNA and the ability to match and create digital biomarkers to help figure out what the right drug is for the right patient for the right time. I think that the multi-omic data will only accelerate and enrich that process. And we think that that infrastructure is almost a purpose-built, perfect use case for AI. It's a ton of unstructured data you're creating, and you've got to take, I've got to go from this standard of DICOM and NIFTY and turn this and grade that and connect it into the Pakistan database and connect it here and connect it there. All that is in the art of the possible now.
Yeah.
And I think I think there's a lot of interesting things on small molecule, but I do think that the areas we see is, and Amgen's done an amazing job for a variety of reasons, but go take KRAS and just say, who can create a discovery? We've done all this work, we're going to democratize it, and then now the opportunity to connect all the multi-omic data, almost like a bottoms-up meeting a top-down target. We know KRAS is really interesting. What are the other multi-omic data? And I think that's another place where American Cancer and Bright Edge could come in to say, hey, we've got these tumor registrars, we've got these people that have this exorbitantly valuable multi-omic data, but it's not really being used in drug discovery, in my personal opinion, the way that it could be or should be. And I think there's an enormous opportunity to create, another sort of library 2.0 that can access those buckets of assets.
I mean, I would argue there's a pre-omics, which is that 60% of cancer deaths are actually attributed to behavioral behaviors that could be intervened, whether they be smoking, diet, exercise, you name it. And so even domestically, we are still collecting data through the cancer prevention cohort studies to understand disparities and risk stratification across different populations, different cancer types, and different behaviors. And so that opens up a whole new field of the effectiveness of existing treatments, as well as a new discovery field for novel therapeutic development.
And epigenomics, is that further along? Is that less tractable?
Well,
I think it's incredibly exciting. I actually would argue, based off of what Alice just said, that you could make a pretty compelling argument it's more exciting. And the epigenetic possibility, when you combine behavior, environment, multi-omics, and this proliferation of low-cost testing, I think that is the blueprint for turning this precision medicine promise that we've had for a very long time into a practice that could literally be here.
We're almost out of time, so rapid fire. Biosimilars, they seem ripe for AI acceleration. Does that?
We have a very strong biosimilars business at Amgen. Just to level set, when medicines pass their window of exclusivity, generic medicines are often made, and small molecules, powders are somewhat easy to manufacture or rapidly commoditize. Bringing a protein therapeutic, even after the period of exclusivity, to patients around the world, that's still technically very difficult. And so at Amgen, being a leader in protein medicines, we have established a biosimilars business where we take very specific medicines, often innovated by peer companies, and then make them accessible to patients around the world. AI is very important for this, but in only some subtle ways, to be honest with you, around quality measures and optimizing the race to be first, which is very important in the commercialization of biosimilars. So I would say AI more in innovative medicines than in biosimilars, with no disrespect to my colleagues in process development who are the best in the industry.
Awesome. Well, we're out of time, but this has been the most incredible panel. I hope you'll all join me in thanking our speakers.